Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Swish Theory NBA Draft Podcast. I'm Will Morris, and today we're going to be talking some 2025 NBA Draft. So, for those of you guys that don't know me, my name is Will. I've been seriously scouting the draft since the 2020 class, so this is my sixth cycle. And this cycle's been a bit different for me. I've always kind of had my Twitter account. Just very active on that, tweeting clips throughout the season, tweeting stats, observations, things like that. But just for kind of a various array of reasons, have not been super active scouting the draft this year. So in many ways, this podcast is you guys kind of catching up in real time with me and watching my process. I'm sure that a lot of the listeners, are maybe even more caught up than I am. But nonetheless, I still want to kind of guide you guys along through my process here, and allow you guys to kind of scout this class in real time with me. I think, it'll be interesting to compare this year to previous years for me, where I'm more kind of in the thick of it throughout the year and am consistently covering the draft. I think in many ways there are some benefits to doing it this way. Not going to be heavily influenced by, like the media and the noise that has kind of like gone on throughout the season. Like, it's not like I know what big boards in February necessarily looked like. Obviously, I do see boards that get published now and whatnot, but I think those like kind of fluctuations of like, oh, so-and-so had a really good game in February on national television. Like, I'm not kind of impacted by any of those sorts of biases that could arise. I'm really able to just kind of look at a prospect's entire body of work, and just analyze that as objectively as I can. In many ways, I do acknowledge that there are a lot of cons to doing this in the way that I'm doing it. Tracking some of those trends throughout the year can be very valuable, and I think there's a certain value in kind of like understanding the narrative of the season from a prospect's perspective, and it's definitely something I'm losing this year. But nonetheless, I think it's, for my own purposes, it's going to be interesting to see how like my board shapes up and how like the overall success of my board compares to those sorts of previous years. Disclosure, I don't have like a finalized board right now that goes like 60 players deep like I normally do. I'm kind of just like watching as much as I can, and I have been the last month or so, just trying to play catch up here. But I figured that this could be a good outlet for me to, just talk about some players, break down strengths and weaknesses, how I project them to play at the next level. And my goal with this is, to have a 2, 3, 4 guys that I'm talking about, and at the end, rank them to give an idea of how my board is sort of framing, because I do still think that the exercise of making a big board and ranking and having opinions, as far as the prospects that you like and maybe don't like as much goes, it's a very important part of this process, and it's not something that I want to lose. So definitely will also be kind of clumping players together by role or position. Or similarities if they went to like the same school or something, just to add some coherence to each of these little mini podcast episodes. But today we're going to be talking about some of the longer, rangier forwards in this class, those being Rasheer Fleming, Carter Bryant, and Cedric Coward. So yeah, let's get into it. So we'll kick things off with Rasheer Fleming here, measured in at 6'8.5" or 6'8.25" without shoes at the combine. So, in that kind of like 6'9.5" range with shoes. But the standout measurement here is obviously that 7.5 wingspan, 7.5 foot wingspan. I mean, that is absolutely ridiculous. And, those are like some big man type measurements. He's on the skinnier side, but um, forgive me, whoever tweeted this out. I can't remember who it was, but essentially his combine measurements were seen to be um, as statistically similar to Jarrett Allen, um, who obviously is anchoring, a defense that was very good this year, along with Evan Mobley. So I think the overall pitch with him is he has these crazy big man type measurements, but he also shoots threes, 8.5 attempts per 100 possessions, 39%. On paper, that's like kind of just an obvious first round guy. Um, and the length is functional, 5.5% block rate, 2.2% steal rate. So, yeah, I mean, they're like on paper, just very clear cut, has that kind of NBA level body, is able to space the floor. So the statistical profile just jumps off the page immediately. The two questions I had going into watching his film was, how real is this shooting? Is he someone that's going to be knocking down tons of shots in a variety of ways? What's the volume going to look like? Is he going to be able to maintain that 39%? Or is it kind of just a fluky 1 year thing? Then the other question I had was what that ideal defensive role is going to look like for him, because obviously he has some special tools, but unsure if he's going to be that kind of guy to like anchor defense, or he's more of this like kind of like roaming four man. So I'll start there. I'll start with the defense, because I think that's an area where he can excel immediately, especially with some fine tuning. He can get really good on that end. I think, as far as my question goes, the answer, I think he's more of this like roaming four type that's going to muck up actions from the weak side. It's not that I don't think he showed nothing as a center on defense. I think he can like gain some brawn and play the five for stretches. I think he backpedals pretty well in drop. And his length somewhat compensates for some of those strength deficiencies. But yeah, I think he's just better suited as a four, kind of like toggling between the dunker spot and the perimeter and ball handlers. And I think it just gives him, an avenue to really let loose on that end and kind of fly around the floor. He is very, very rangy. And when you have arms as long as his, it makes covering ground and kind of toggling between all those different areas of the floor very easy. I think like the two things that I will say about his defense are, one, those strength deficiencies. He's not like an overly bulky player. I think there's, avenues for him to grow in that way, but he is pretty physical. Like he has always been a very good rebounder, which is, an encouraging sign. 22.8% defensive rebound percentage this season. And that's a number that has increased every year. So I don't think you're like sacrificing anything on the glass by having him on the floor, even though he isn't super, super strong. The other thing with him is I just think he's pretty jumpy, which is something that you see a lot from guys in this mold, but he is in his third year of college. So I think you hope that some of those things will, some of those just general jumpiness habits will go away at the pro level. But yeah, I think Rasheer is phenomenal defensive prospect. Like just that length and size and mobility, those are things that you just straight up can't teach. I don't think he's like an overly incredible leaper, which puts a ceiling on his rim protection in some ways. But at the same time, just having a 7.5-foot wingspan, like his reach is phenomenal. And I think as like a help side guy, and someone that is really, really good at defending in transition. It's not like he has to have like a 40-inch vertical or something to make an impact on that end. So yeah, moving sort of along to the offense here. The shooting is really interesting with him because, as I mentioned, 159 three-point attempts this season, shot 39% from three. That's like, it's hard not to buy it with those numbers. Um, I think year to year, it's a bit more patchy. He was at 32% last season on 105 attempts, 29.7% the previous year. So it all kind of accumulates to 338 attempts, 34.9 percent from the line, or from behind the 3-point line. That is, from the foul line, 68% from his career, was in the 60s each of the two previous seasons, and then jumped up to 74% this season, which is, a pretty decent number, especially for someone that's kind of in this like rangy four, where like, he's definitely like a defense presenting prospect. So I think just having this potential as a shooter is an added bonus with him. But yeah, I think looking at the way he gets his shot off, pretty quick trigger. Wind up is a bit long, but I don't think he needs some like crazy mechanical change to get his shot up in the NBA. Has a pretty high release point, and isn't afraid to fire away, which I think is the most important thing. I was encouraged that there is some little movement shooting things with him. Nothing too crazy, but St. Joseph's runs him off a lot of these like Iverson cuts where he's coming across the free throw line. And the fact that he was able to make those cuts, catch, and kind of like rotate his body, self-organize, and get into his shot is huge. Like, he's not just standing in the corner and getting hot from there. He's someone that has like little blips of movement shooting. And I think I just like his general wherewithal without the ball in his hands. Like, he moves into open space well, like drifts into open areas on the perimeter and can fire off the catch from there. I will say I do wish that there was more to him as a pull-up shot maker. That's just not something that he brings to the table at all, and definitely puts a cap on what you can expect him to do as a creator in the NBA. He made 2 off the dribble threes this season and 0 in each of the previous years. 100% of his threes were assisted in each of the previous seasons. So yeah, it's just not something that's going to be part of his game. And you don't expect him to like be this high usage pull-up shooter, but I still think it's an added layer of versatility that would make him even more of a weapon on the offensive end. So definitely unfortunate that that's not part of his game, and I think is a limiting factor as far as his overall shooting projection. Also just kind of like a bit skeptical of his touch. Isn't like particularly good in sort of those in-between areas. He shot 5 for 22 on non-rim 2-pointers this year, and although I think he's got like decent touch at the rim, he just did not really show anything from the mid-range, which does matter to me. And although he did get up to 74% from the line this year, which I think I mentioned is good for someone sort of in this mold. Like, if we're trying to project exactly what level of shooter he's going to be, it's not great, especially when you consider like that he was in the 60s each of the previous years, and it all kind of averages out to 68%. So, I don't think he's like a slam dunk knockdown shooter. I think there's definitely a chance that this 39% mark isn't necessarily going to hold up in the NBA. Not saying he's not going to shoot at all, but I think he might just be like a capable, like knocking down open spot ups when they're there, rather than, being some like crazy high volume, firing off his shot in lots of different ways. Aside from shooting, I think I kind of mentioned this in the context of like the movement shooting stuff, but I want to mention at least his off ball movement. I like his general wherewithal on that end of the floor. like always been like, as I mentioned, like a good rebounder. I think that translates to the offensive end. Plenty of instances of him being on the perimeter and flying in for putbacks or just cutting to open space on the baseline or in the middle of the zone. Gets used as the roller on offense a fair bit too. I think he's a bit flawed as far as being like a volume roll man in the NBA, just because I don't think he's a particularly great vertical athlete. But I think his like feel and positioning as a roll man, not like just drifting away from the ball handler. Like I think he is positions himself pretty well when he's rolling to the rim. Again, I don't know how much that's going to be in his game in the NBA, given that I'm kind of projecting him as more of a four than like a full time center. But I think it is important if he is like, bulking up and playing center a little bit for spurts down the road. I think where a lot of issues with him arise offensively is when the ball gets put on the floor. He just honestly doesn't dribble anywhere close to an NBA level, gets really bothered by digs and pressure. And I think kind of in conjunction with those ball handling issues, the coordination just isn't there as far as passing goes. Like there's a lot of live dribble reads that he misses, where he's like driving to the rim, he'll attract a double, and he'll just kind of like take the contact and hoist up an ill-advised shot when there's an open man that he could easily throw it to. Again, not like a particularly high usage player on the offensive end, but his assist rate, 8.5%, isn't great. And he's always kind of been a below average assist rate guy. So definitely have some questions about his ability to be a ball mover on the offensive end of the floor. And, it kind of alluded to like some of the creation woes as far as his pull up shooting goes. But yeah, that dribbling definitely plays a role in that, where I think when he puts the ball on the floor, there just isn't that much there. I think he just kind of has a rudimentary handle. Interesting case because, well, I don't love his handle. As I said, he is like pretty quick and is good at getting by guys when that advantage is already created. Like he does have a pretty explosive first step, but he definitely struggles if that advantage isn't already there. And I think he just kind of gets himself into these positions a lot of the time where he's at the rim and, maybe not even at the rim, but like 5 or 6 feet away from the rim, is forced to like pick up his dribble and then just kind of flails the ball at the rim. Again, he's not the bulkiest player. He's not great at getting to the foul line. 28.5% free throw rate is really underwhelming for someone with his physical tools and measurables. I just don't think he's particularly great at, getting himself in positions where he can get to the foul line. So, well, I think that, the free throw rate is low, which is oftentimes an indicator of someone not being like overly physical. I think he is a pretty physical player. I think he just doesn't really have the handle to like get himself into the necessary positions to utilize that. So want to run a little BART query here that I was looking at, because I think Rasheer is a pretty interesting case because although his wingspan is definitely historic, we've kind of seen a lot of guys in this like Paul Reed, like Mo Harkless, Marquise Chris type, like very rangy four-man type roles. And a lot of them have just like really struggled to stick in the NBA. And I think like this free throw rate is like a really big reason for that. Like a lot of these guys just, really struggle to create for themselves in any sort of capacity, and like get into those necessary spots to like draw that contact at the rim. So here's a list of guys that had over 40 dunks, which Rasheer did, and had free throw rates under 40 that were drafted in the first round. There's about 27 guys here, so I'm not going to read them all off, but some notable names here, like Mo Harkless is here, Obi Toppin is here, Marquise Chris is here, Patrick Patterson is here, Robert Williams is here, as is Derek Lively. Brandon Clark is here. There's some more like traditional big men type, like Mark Williams, Udoka Azubuike, John Henson. There's also a lot more like creator type prospects, like Paulo Banchero is here. RJ Barrett is showing up here as well. But I think Rasheer definitely has an edge on a lot of the like worst case guys on this list, just because the shooting projection is at least interesting. As I mentioned, like 8.5 threes per 100 possessions, 39% from three with his measurements. Like in many ways, you don't want to just like overthink that and group him in with a lot of these guys that I kind of just mentioned as worst cases in that kind of like rangy, hyper athletic four mold with some other physical limitations as far as strength goes and that ability to get to the foul line. So Keegan Murray is like a notable name here. Someone that got up 8.4 threes per 100 and shot 39.8% from three at Iowa. I think like, definitely doesn't have that like fluidity and coordination that Keegan has. But I think, it's regardless something that sets Rasheer apart from some of these guys that just struggled to have like really, really long-term impacts in the league. And I don't want to diminish, like a Mo Harkless or something that did play like a key role on a lot of these Trailblazers teams. Like if you're getting someone of that caliber in the like middle back half of first round, like I think you're probably like pretty happy. But yeah, I think it's something that makes Rasheer just an interesting prospect and gives him an edge on some of the guys that he wouldn't, I think, in a normal class get grouped with. All right, so let's move on to Carter Bryant here. I think a lot of the conversations with him are pretty similar on the offensive end. He's a bit smaller, 6'6.5" without shoes, wingspan just under 7 feet. So still really, really long, but not quite at Rasheer's level. But yeah, I mean, +6 wingspan. Like he is still, the size of a prototypical NBA wing, has that kind of length. Very modest counting stats this season, only averaged 6.5 points a game as a freshman at Arizona. So a couple years behind Rasheer in college, although I think as far as age on draft day goes, it's closer to a year separation. Defensively, I think this is where Carter Bryant is going to make his money. I think, as far as like advanced stats for a freshman goes, he's kind of like everything that you want. 5.8% block rate, 2.8% steal rate, also at a 7.5 BPM. So had an impact, was making plays on the defensive end, playing for a major school against, the highest level of competition that you can really play against in college as a freshman. And he also shot 37% from three on 8 attempts per 100 possessions. So I think the like one sentence summary is very similar to Rasheer in, great events creator on defense that can shoot the ball off the catch and hit open shots. Defensively, Carter Bryant, phenomenal. Love his tenacity. He is physical enough to like just really bang it with guys in the post and wall up against larger players. There are times on that end where it almost seems like he's just kind of like moving at a different pace and playing kind of at another gear than the offense. Like the offense will kind of just be passing it around the perimeter, just going through the motions, and Carter Bryant will pounce on it in a way that really just catches the offense sleeping. Kind of reminiscent of like Tari Eason's film in that way. I think they're very different players, but that ability to just kind of like pounce when the offense is kind of just sleepwalking through their sets is very similar. Again, really like his physicality. I think he's someone that is constantly making second efforts on defense. Like there's plays where he'll close out to the perimeter, maybe get caught jumping, but then he'll recover back and block a shot at the rim. Like the play is never over with Carter Bryant. He's someone that just plays really hard on that end. It definitely can get him into trouble sometimes. He fouls a lot. He averaged, I think, 4.8 fouls per 40. So per 40 minutes, he's almost just about fouling out of every game on average. Obviously, he's not playing all 40, and there's 6 fouls to foul out of a game in the NBA. But regardless, I think there's times where maybe he gets a little bit too handsy, but at the same time, he's young, and you can't like really teach that level of physicality to the degree that he has it. He's already a good defender with the ceiling to be great. Just makes life difficult when containing drivers on the ball, helping at the rim from the weak side, closing out to the perimeter. He blocks a lot of jumpers while closing out, which is just like a testament to his length and his motor and his ability to cover ground. I think he's better off the ball than on the ball. I think on the ball, his footwork could definitely stand to improve a little bit. I don't think you want him like chasing around those like really quick guards. I think he's best kind of guarding like some 2s, 3s, and 4s. Footwork can get pretty choppy. And again, I think just speaking to like the fouling and the jumpiness, bites on like a lot of ball fakes while guarding on the ball. Again, these aren't things I want to knock him for too much because he is young and is a very good defender, but these are just things that I think he could clean up that could take him to that next level. So yeah, brings a lot to the table on the defensive end. Shifting gears to offense, I am a big fan of his off the catch mechanics. I think he's like a pretty safe bet to be a plus spot up guy with some minor movement stuff, similar to Rasheer, where it's not like he's running around screens like crazy, but I like the way that he relocates off the ball. I think his shot prep is phenomenal. He always has his hands up and just like flows into like kind of drifting around off ball to like setting his feet, catching and firing really quickly and really efficiently. His mechanics off the hop are very, very smooth. I think, there may be some discrepancies numbers wise, where it's not like he's an elite free throw shooter. He was at 69.5% this year. But he is also, in his first year of college, right? So I think you give him like a little bit more leeway there. And I buy the mechanics, and it's not like he shot like sub 30% this year in conjunction with that 69%. Like he got up 8 attempts per 100, shot 37%. I definitely buy the off the catch shooting with him. Again, not so much off the dribble 3 stuff this year, but I think he hit a couple, which again, Rasheer hit like a couple in 3 years. Carter Bryant hit a couple this year just off one season. So I think the hope is that there's more room for growth there. And I think there is like an avenue for him maybe being a guy that can hit pull-ups in the mid-range. There's a play that sticks out to me where he's like driving baseline and then to the left and then stops, pivots, and spins and hits this mid-range jumper. It looked really smooth. Again, a lot of this is just like really projection based. Like he only hit like 7 unassisted non-rim 2-pointers this year. So um, it's all kind of aesthetics in some ways, but I think just given where is at in his development and just how smooth he looks off the catch, I think, there's hope for him to maybe be able to like hit 2 dribble pull-ups inside the arc. Like I don't think that's a outlandish thing to project for Carter Bryant. Still, I think, there is like a big question mark as far as what he does when he's run off the line. Was really efficient at the rim this year. He shot 76% at the rim. But most of it is on like baseline cuts, and he has great feel as a cutter. Like he's, again, like an exceptional off-ball mover. 17 dunks, like he's capable of finishing above the rim unquestionably, but he only had 8 unassisted rim makes this season, which again, we're like projecting him as kind of this like hyper athletic defender. Like that's just not really going to cut it as far as projecting him as some like high level creator. He's not someone that's really like getting low on his drives, not a particularly good ball handler. Don't really like see him changing directions too often with the ball in his hands. So yeah, I don't even know if it's a question of like Carter Bryant being like a primary ball handler or something. Like I think it's a question of, does he have enough, like when he gets run off the line, when teams close out hard on him, is he going to be able to continue just continue advantages rather than like create advantages? And that's kind of like what's holding me back with, I don't know exactly where he's ranked, but like I definitely can't like put him in that like mid lottery tier or anything like that, just because I have serious concerns about that ability to continue advantages. I think the way he does it is kind of what I alluded to previously, where it's like, okay, is he going to be able to like pump fake 2 dribbles inside the arc or kind of sidestep and get to that like basic pull-up jumper? I think even compared to Fleming, where, I see these blips of him being able to like explode into gaps versus a tilted D. I just don't think Bryant has that kind of explosiveness that Rasheer has. I don't think he has particularly great first step athleticism. So, yeah, I think there's a bit more pressure on him being able to like hit some of those like rudimentary pull-ups and just move the ball around the perimeter, which I think he's already good at doing that stuff. I think it's more of just like, how does he threaten the defense as a scorer when he gets run off the line? But nonetheless, like I still think Carter Bryant is a really interesting prospect, particularly for what he brings to the table and has the potential to be on the defensive end. And like I said, like he is like, could very well be a very, very good off the catch shooter at the next level. Like I do really like what I've seen from him as far as that goes. So yeah, would consider myself to still be a fan of Carter Bryant's game. All right. So lastly here, we're going to move on to Cedric Coward. And I know that I mentioned at the start of this show that I was kind of in an advantageous position as far as, not having the noise impact me as much as some other evaluators potentially, just because I haven't been following the way that these big boards have been moving, guys moving up 20 spots, down 20 spots and whatnot throughout the season. I'm kind of just looking at how things stand now, or like as of a month ago when I really started diving into everyone's film. That being said, the way that Cedric Coward has kind of had this late rise, I mean, even in my short time, really, really being locked in and paying attention to things this cycle, he's kind of just emerged from nowhere. So I'll admit I was pretty skeptical of Coward going into my like in-depth evaluation of him. Of course, try to drown out that noise as much as you can. But like just him being this like late combine riser that only played 6 games this season due to injury was a bit scary to, these conversations of him being a mid first round pick. Um, I do want to at least acknowledge that I felt like I was kind of going in with an extra critical eye here. So Coward measured in at 6'5", 213 pounds, 7'2" wingspan. So I think you can again kind of see the theme here. Long wingspan guys, crazy measurements, good inch shorter than Carter Bryant, but also 2.5 inches longer as far as wingspan goes. Sort of an unconventional journey to the draft. Obviously, has kind of been in this like late riser stage, but coming out of high school, 0 D1 offers, played for a D3 school called Willamette, transferred to Eastern Washington for his sophomore and junior years. And yeah, in that D3 school, Willamette averaged 19 points a game, shot 45% from three. So was obviously just too good for that league. Transferred to Washington State after 2 years at Eastern Washington. Played 6 games at Washington State after a shoulder injury. Played very well in those 6 games. Then announced he was transferring to Duke while also entering his name into the draft pool. And now it seems like he has enough buzz to stay in the draft for sure. So we'll start with his offense. I think that you'd be hard pressed to find a player in this class that has just better scoring touch, both in terms of the numbers and film. So looking at his college sample as a whole, he shot 71% from 2 on 313 attempts. And, there's some dunks in there that buoys that a little bit, but he's not like a super high volume dunk guy. Like in the 6 games this season, he only had 1 dunk. And last season, 13 dunks. So, and then the season before 12. It's not like that 71% number is really getting buoyed or anything by him having a gazillion dunks or something. Like he just genuinely has phenomenal touch inside the arc. On non-rim twos, he shot 58.6% on 87 attempts for his college career, 83.2% from the foul line on 179 attempts, and 38% from 3 on a tad under 200 attempts. So yeah, I mean, those are some pretty amazing shooting indicators, especially when you're considering that this is a guy with a 7'2" wingspan. Like the combination of elite measurements and just otherworldly scoring touch is very, very unique. It's not something that you see all the time when looking at these prospects. So how does this touch kind of manifest itself in his game? Obviously, his shooting beyond the arc, very, very good shooter, smooth mechanics, confident to fire off the catch, clean footwork to get into his shot and rhythm. He has one of those shots that I know this is kind of like an aesthetic bias thing, but he has one of those shots that just always looks good when he releases it. I think someone like Rasheer, where there are like bad misses in his profile where the ball just hits the rim in a bad way. Like his shots are kind of almost always on target, and you almost always have this idea of like, yeah, that looks like it's gonna go in. The off the dribble shot making has huge potential. Coward just has some really enticing creation tools. His ability to get low and generate leverage versus defenders is, yeah, it's just really impressive. It's crazy ankle flexibility. If you like screen grab and like pause on a lot of his drives, um, kind of at that moment where he's starting his drive, his shins will often be parallel to the ground. So that ability to just like get really low um, allows him to just generate leverage when he's creating off the bounce. Um, and then that combined with his ability to decelerate and just quickly elevate into his jumper is uber impressive. Um, I think there are definitely some flaws as far as his creation goes, but his movement skills are phenomenal, phenomenal movement skills. And with his size and length, when he does stop and get into that pull up jumper, he's really able to just like elevate over anyone. Um, just has the size to and release point to just get his shot up over the top of people. Um, his game as a slasher is definitely a bit more raw, and I'd say it's more flashy than like substantial. I don't say flashy in that he's like some crazy flashy player. I just mean it's more like blips of like really enticing drives rather than him having like some fully developed game as a slasher. Um, Historically, he's actually played as more of this like forward big man type on offense. He has lots of reps in the post where he's capable of like overpowering and using his size to play some bully ball against smaller players. But there's also reps where he's matched up against larger dudes and kind of has to just like footwork and slither his way around them. Again, like his flexibility and length to execute here and slither around some of these bigger guys is not something that you see everyone with or every wing do. At the same time, a lot of his shots at the rim from his college career weren't necessarily drives, but are kind of in this post up mold. Similar theme to the other two guys. Coward is just not a particularly good ball handler, despite having some of these really unique movement patterns. There's times where he's able to get low and kind of like tries to do these like change of directions and split between defenders. But he just can't, and he'll lose his handle or he'll just have to pick up his dribble early. So definitely have some concerns about that ability to get all the way to the rim, not necessarily because of his athletic tools, but more so because of his handle. I think there are some flashes with him as a driver where he is able to change directions and just kind of like wiggle his way into tight areas. Again, it's more flashes, it's more blips, but the fact that he has the movement skills to do those things give him a really interesting ceiling on the offensive end. Defensively, I think he's pretty raw. 3.7% block rate and 1.8% steal rate for his career. And you know, I keep referencing kind of like his career college numbers here, just because we are looking at like a 6-game sample size, and I did go back and watch a good bit of the Eastern Washington stuff before, because you know 6 games worth of stuff is kind of a lot, not that much to like form a real impression of. So yeah, I do like mention the career college numbers for that just to increase our sample size here. But 3.7% block rate, 1.8% steal rate, obviously a little bit less than the other two guys in both of those things. It's not like he's a monstrous events creator, but still, I think you see a lot of these kind of like offensive slanted wings that have like really low steal and block rates. And that's not what we're looking at with Coward. Like he is long, he is able to use that length. It does manifest itself on the defensive end of the floor for him. Physically, he's pretty weak, and his footwork on the ball is rough. Like he'll like, oftentimes like expose that top foot and just get blown by when he's guarding a quicker player. And although like I do think he's shown some impressive like physicality just from having that experience as kind of playing in this like big man type role, he isn't like particularly strong. Um, Off the ball, I think he can be a little spacey too. But there's also tons of clips of him just punching the ball out of midair, like staying attached through a screen and blocking movement jumper. His length gives him a lot of leeway on that end to the point where I think like you can feel comfortable projecting him as potentially a plus defender down the line. So yeah, Coward is definitely a very interesting two-way case. I think defensively he's a bit behind the other two guys we talked about today, but offensively, I mean, there is a really high ceiling here. And I think I kind of mentioned at the start of my talking about him how I was kind of had a tad of skepticism going into evaluating his film. And I mean, I was, even with that skepticism, I was wowed by some of the things that he's able to do on the offensive end and just his overall touch and potential as a shooter and maybe even shot creator with some handling improvements. Now, improving one's handle is easier said than done. I think it's actually one of the harder traits to develop, but I think with him, there's just these interesting and unique movement patterns that you have to at least be willing to take a chance on. Some of those things develop, especially after you move past the top, 4 or 5 picks in the draft or whatever. And even if they don't come through, he's still going to be a very good shooter with good off-ball versatility. He's going to be able to get to like the 1-2 dribble pull-ups. And I think a lot of the defensive stuff, there's just low-hanging fruit for him to improve, just given his measurements and overall motor. So I'll kind of wrap things up here. Just kind of giving my overarching thoughts on each player and then ranking them. All kind of rangy wing prospects that have the tools to stick around the league, undoubtedly. Fleming in that kind of like just very rangy, like forward big hybrid type way. I think there's, a trap with him where you're comparing him to like the Marquise Chris's and the Paul Reeds, or like even like the Kendall Browns or like Glenn Robinson type guys. I think he's a better shooter than the first two guys I mentioned, and I think just more functional an athlete on defense than the last two guys I mentioned in Kendall Brown and Glenn Robinson III. So I think just his package of being so physically huge and long, while also having that kind of ceiling as a shooting is very enticing, but I think just really, really limited as a creator. And I still do have some questions about like the level of shooter that he's going to be. For Carter Bryant, really high motor guy. And just the level of defender he is as a freshman is really enticing. I honestly just think he's far away from, any of that like creation potential that others may see in him. I just think it's like really far away. So I'm not really seeing him as sort of this creator bet, but I buy the off the catch shooting like probably more than I do with Fleming, and I am very high on his physicality and potential versatility on the defensive end. With Coward, I think different sort of player in that with him, I think there is avenues of like very high end offensive outcomes where, he can legitimately be one of these like top not like the top, but like a real initiator on offense on a team that's in the playoffs, while also providing value on the defensive end with some minor things to clean up. So yeah, I think if I had to rank them, I think Coward is just, to me, the most interesting prospect here, just because of that potential offensive value that he could bring. I think just the movement patterns that he shows are just so unique, and I'm very confident that he's going to be a high level shooter. It's tough when he only played 6 games this past season, but like a guy that I can't help but think about here is Aaron Nesmith, who played 14 games the year before he got drafted, and he was definitely like a polarizing figure in the draft Twitter community. I was ultimately too low on him. He shot 52% from three in those 14 games, and I think a lot of people, myself included, just like saw it as a fluke. But I do think you just got to look at the college sample as a whole. You know, Nesmith is a guy that's playing huge minutes on a team that's in the Eastern Conference Finals for the second year in a row. And, you know, it's not like a direct one-to-one style comparison, but people get injured, and I think it's hard to like really knock Coward for that. When looking at the film, I mean, there is just so much there to work with. I would honestly probably have him a tier or two above each of these guys. Again, we'll see how my board shakes out, but I definitely, in a vacuum, would prefer Cedric Coward to Fleming and Carter Bryant. Bryant and Fleming definitely are going to be closer on my board. I think I'd prefer Carter Bryant a little bit, just because I think I see a little bit more there as an off the catch shooter. And while Fleming does, you know, have tons to bring to the table defensively, I think Carter Bryant might even have a higher ceiling, even if he isn't quite as long. I think he just kind of fits that like prototypical wing defender type build a little bit better. Whereas Rasheer, you know, he's a year and some change older. And although I think he can shoot, and, you know, is very deserving of being a first round pick and will be close to Carter Bryant on my final board, I think, you know, we're at this point in the draft where the gaps between guys aren't as large. And I just think for some of those reasons that I mentioned with Bryant, Rasheer is just going to be very slightly lower on my board. But yeah, thank you guys for listening. If you've made it this far, be sure that you're following the Swish Theory on Twitter. I want to be cranking out more of these episodes as we lead up to the draft, and definitely we'll be having more guests on the show as well to provide their perspectives on prospects. So it's not just me and my voice for an hour, but really appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time.